Today we're just starting to discuss, I don't think we'll finish today, but it's extremely interesting to me topic, and it raises tremendous questions and issues that really are essential to an understanding of Judaism, and to what extent there's historical development or even historical regression. These are kind of vague terms right now. You might not know what I'm talking about, but you'll see what I mean in a few minutes. We're going to analyze one of the most cryptic passages in the Torah, which could be glossed over easily enough, but it has an unbelievable history to it. And we're going to explore that history with all its profound implications. Just not too long ago, a few weeks ago, we read a genealogical list, which is extremely boring, which traces the generations from Adam until Noah. And each one of those generations described in a very strict formulaic form. Almost every generation is described exactly in the same words, just substituting names and how long they lived. So any deviation in any of those generations, we talked a while ago about one example where it had two extra words. I don't know if you remember that, and implications of those words. So what I want to do is compare the generation of Chanoch or Enoch with we'll just take a look at the previous generation so you can see the distinction. So let's take a look what it says here. So Torah says the following. I'm always deliberating whether to read it in Hebrew or in English. We'll just do it in English here. And Yared lived, I'm going to send this out. This doesn't always work in Zoom, but we'll try it. We'll try to make it a little interactive here. As we go comparing these two generations, I'd like you to note if there's any distinctions between the classic formulation, which is the first three psukim. That's just very strictly formulated in the same way that all the other generations are. And then the next generation, which is Chanoch, and see if there's any distinction. And Yer lived 162 years and he begot Chanoch. And Yer lived after he'd begotten Chanoch 800 years, and he begot sons and daughters. And all the days of Yer were 962 years, and he died. All the generations are described just like that. Now we get to the next generation. And Chanoch lived 65 years, and he begot Metushelach. And Chanoch walked with God.
He was much younger.
Yeah, okay, outstanding. Outstanding. So the first thing is that when he started having babies, he's much younger than the previous generations, right? Like it says by year, it says 162 years, and he's a younger man, only 65 years old when he started having kids. And Chanoch walked with God after he'd begotten Metushelach 300 years, and he begot sons and daughters. Okay, and all the days of Chanoch were 365 years. And Chanoch walked with God, and he was no longer, for God had taken him. Okay, so we notice already that the age at which he started giving birth is significantly less than the previous generations. Anything else strike you? Anybody else here, out there?
Well,
he also lived a shorter life.
Okay, yeah, his lifespan is significantly shorter.
Well, it doesn't say he died. That's going to be one of the enigmas there. Just
Okay.
God took him, whatever that means.
Yeah, so it doesn't say he died.
You
right?
Don't have it listed, but is it important to know that he's the seventh from Adam?
Okay, so okay, hang on a second. So the right doesn't say he died. It says he was no longer, for God had taken him. That's a mysterious expression. It also happens to be the seventh generation. So that's not necessarily an aberration, right? But perhaps there's some significance to that. And any other points that you notice that makes this generation a little different than the previous generations?
Well, it has this walked with God structure.
Yeah, walked with God. Okay, so absolutely. So I think that those are 4 distinctions, right? And this is just a couple of verses, right? And we already have all these distinctions. Now, of course, when we're learning Chumash, what's the first thing we're going to do after we look at the pasuk and notice things that need clarification? What do we do next?
You look at Rashi.
Look at Rashi. Thank you. Let's take a look at Rashi. And Rashi says the following: Vayitalech Chanoch Tzadik haya v'kal b'dato lashuv laharshia. He was a tzaddik, but he was a little vulnerable, wasn't too strong in his character and convictions. And so there was a concern that he's going to backslide from his righteousness. Lefichach miher hakadosh baruch hu. Therefore, God quickly preempted this. V'silko v'hemito kodem zmano. And he killed him before his time. So now let's just understand what questions is asked. First of all, it answers the question about longevity. Why didn't he live the same length of time as the other generations? Because God killed him prematurely in order to do him a favor. And another question, what does it mean he walked with God? So according to Rashi, he walked with God means that, well, at the present moment, he was walking with God. He was righteous now, but he was very vulnerable. That status of being righteous was very vulnerable. So he was walking with God. So he was praiseworthy, but vulnerable. And therefore, God did him a favor and killed him. And as Rashi now says explicitly, and that's why here the Torah changes the formulation regarding his death. Doesn't say, and he died. Rather, it says he's not in the world, right? In the sense of he didn't finish out his allotted time because God did him a favor to knock him off early.
Just as a pedagogic question, you're bringing Rashi first, as opposed to much earlier people, and it is quoting a midrash. How old is that midrash?
Yeah, so you're one step ahead of me. Hang on. You're doing exactly what I'm going to be doing. So just hang on. We're going to get there. So Rashi has one more comment. When the Torah says kilakachoto, that God took him. So Rashi says lifnei zmano, prematurely. That's a point he's already made. But now he adds proof that that phrase, he took him, means he killed him. So he quotes a pasuk from Yechezkel. It says in Yechezkel, Hineni lokeach mimcha et machmad einecha. Behold, I'm going to take from you the precious one of your eyes. And that's a horrible section in Yechezkel where God says, I'm going to kill your wife. And the expression used there is lokeach mimcha. Why is that an important verse? Because it's the same verb here, ki lakachoto. God took him. So we want to know what a word means, look it up elsewhere. So we see that that phrase of taking somebody can mean killing them. So just like it means in Yechezkel killing him, it means to killing him. And we might want to ask, what other options are there for this expression? God took him. What else could it mean? So just hang on to that question for now. Now, Bruce mentioned the idea of why am I looking at Rashi first? Now, I'm looking at Rashi first because that's the way we do things. Okay. Except for when you look at Rashi, if you have time, I always recommend that you take a look at the earlier sources, particularly the source that Rashi's quoting. And usually a good edition of Rashi will cite the source here, like it says even in the English here, Genesis Rabbah 25:1, right? So it's not such a big deal to look that up. And I've made this point many, many times. Rashi is almost entirely a paraphrase and anthology of midrashic Talmudic sources. There's almost not an original word in Rashi. Of course, that raises the whole question, why is Rashi so great? And I've addressed that in earlier discussions, so we'll leave that for now. So let's take a look at Rashi's source, and almost always you'll be educated quite a bit if you take a look at Rashi's source. You'll appreciate what Rashi did.
How old
Rashi's
is
not
this
just
guy?
taking a bunch of early sources and dumping them into some kind of basket, and that's Rashi's commentary. He is selecting among alternative views within the rabbinic literature from the time of the Talmud, and he is also often shortening the language, abbreviating it in ways that could be significant. So let's take a look at the midrash from which Rashi is quoting.
And what is the century from this midrash from?
Yeah.
What-
Okay. Now here, this is a big question. So when we want to date these texts, there are two issues that are independent. One is, what is the date of the, let's call it the publishing of this particular anthology of midrash? That's one question. The other question is, to when can we date the traditions that are collected in the midrash? Now, the problem is that both those questions cannot be answered definitively. Why? Because we don't have sufficient evidence. So you will find in many, many, many classic works, dates ranging from the 1st century of the Common Era to early medieval times, believe it or not. Scholars don't know. The same thing with Breshit Rabbah, which is one of the most famous collections of midrashim. We don't know precisely, and there's a big range. Now, the second question is, what about the antiquity of the views quoted here? So you might say that should be an easy one because we know who these people are. Rabbi Chama bar Hoshaya, right? Rabbi Abahu, right? Rabbi Tanchuma, right? There's going to be all these sages quoted, and we know when they lived. So you could see these are all from the time of the Talmud. So you could say, well, it doesn't really matter when this anthology was created because we're quoting from sages who are in the time of the Tanaim and Amoraim. So that's also not so simple because there some academic scholars claim that many times you'll have a later work that uses the names of much earlier sages in order to make it sound like this text is more ancient than it really is. That's called pseudoepigrapha, when we attribute a text to some personality artificially. So is this artificial association with these rabbis or not? I don't know. And that's something that could be argued. So unfortunately, Bruce, I don't have an answer to your question because of the issues I discussed. But I, generally speaking, assume, I take for granted when you have these well-accepted midrashim that quote rabbis that are Tanim and Amorim, I personally, I assume that if the anthology is not necessarily from that period, but the traditions are from that period, unless there's some strong evidence to the contrary. So let's assume these are authentic Talmudic midrashim. And look what it says here. And Chanoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. That's our verse. Rabbi Chama, Rabbi Oshaya said, and he was not, that phrase. What does that mean? It means that he was not inscribed in the roll book of the righteous, but in the roll of the wicked. So don't think when it says he walked with God. Now think about that phrase for a second. Are there any other biblical personalities that we find some variation of that phrase, walking with God, appearing in connection with those biblical personalities? What other personalities?
Noah.
Noah, very famous, right? How about anybody else?
Well, Avram worked like in front of God, perhaps.
Yeah, exactly. So the and now I assume that it's good. It's good for the Jews to say you're walking with God, right? But so it's pretty striking here that the Midrash says in this particular case, don't be misled when it means he was not. It's not necessarily referring to the death here. It means he's not what you think he is, right? He's not in the roll book of the righteous, but the roll book of the wicked. Rabbi Ibu said Chanoch was a hypocrite. Now, the Hebrew word here, hypocrite is probably not the best translation. He was inconsistent and weak is a better term than hypocrite. Sounds like someone who's is evil in intent. But the midrashic language here indicates not so much that he was evil in intent. He just was a righteous person. Many many times, but vulnerable. Okay, acting sometimes as righteous, sometimes as a wicked man. Therefore, the holy and blessed be he said, "While he is righteous, I will remove him." Bad translation, and remove him. The Hebrew, it clearly means kill him. Rabbi Ibu also said he judged him on Rosh Hashanah, right? Or God knocked him off, or judged him then when he judges the whole world. Okay, so let's just pause here for a second. So anybody knows, if we had to guess what Rashi's source here is, so is it Rabbi Hoshaya there? Is it Rabbi Ibu? Right? Where's Rashi here? So, I mean, it's pretty clear, and I'm not even sure there's a dispute here. I don't know if Rabbi Chama Bar, Rabbi Hoshaya and Rabbi Ibu agree. It sounds more or less like they agree. Right? Rabbi Hoshaya is saying that don't think he was righteous. He was really wicked, meaning he was inconsistent, he was vulnerable, he was weak. And then Rabbi Ibu takes that theme, right? Says that what we just said now, and therefore says that's why God killed him early. So to do him a favor, knock him off before he backslides.
Question?
You know, but you have a lot of wicked people in the world, and God doesn't knock them off because of that.
Yeah. Well, of course, we don't really know that because God knocks them off earlier than they were intended to die. So we never know what the intended lifespan of anybody was. But it is interesting that why does the Torah single him out when presumably there were a lot of people like him in his generation, and perhaps we could say tentatively that in his favor, what stood out about Chanoch is that the rest of his generation was corrupt completely, and he was only semi-corrupt. He had his good moments. So in that sense, he stands out. Yes, Bruce.
I'm just shocked by the negative personification of someone who where so little is written, at least in the Torah itself, especially since we have a whole book by him, unless that's the point, that Jews that we didn't like wrote that other book, and this is in response to that.
Yeah, so you're way ahead of us right now, and there may be some truth to all of that, but we'll get there one step at a time. It is fascinating and counterintuitive to say that he walked with God is somehow not necessarily a positive thing in this particular case. Okay, now it goes on. Rashi doesn't quote this, but it's extremely important for appreciating what Rashi's saying. Some sectarians asked Rabbi Abahu, "We do not find that Chanoch died," right? Doesn't say he died, right? So some sectarians, some heretics, went up to Rabbi Abahu, said, "He didn't die." Says, doesn't say he died. "How so?" inquired he. Rabbi Abahu said, "What are you talking about?" "Taking is employed here, and also in connection with Eliyahu," said they. So they say, hey, we're not idiots. We also know Tanakh. And this notion of God taking you is found by Eliyahu. Eliyahu didn't die. He went up to heaven in a storm, and he spends the rest of eternity going to brisses and drinking our wine at the Seder. Right, so why don't we assume Chanoch also? He's beamed up to heaven, and he's doing whatever he does up there. Notice that they're called heretics. That's interesting. Or here it says sectarians, same thing. And so that's pretty good textual proof. So Rabbi Abahu says that not so fast. "If you stress the word taking," he answered, "then taking is employed here, while in Yechezkel it says, 'Behold, I take away from thee the desire of thine eyes.'" We saw that in Rashi. So Rashi, fascinatingly enough, quotes two parts of this midrash that are actually in the midrash itself separated by their material. So Rashi quotes the notion that God knocked him off prematurely in order to save him from backsliding. And then he quotes the proof from Yechezkel, meaning Rashi's really saying, and don't compare him to Eliyahu. Right? You only really appreciate that in the context of the midrash. You wouldn't know that Rashi's saying, and don't compare it to Eliyahu, but compare it to Yechezkel. The reason that Rashi had to bend over backwards to say, here's textual proof that he really died, is because apparently there was a strong voice in the time of the 2,000 years ago that said he didn't die, as you see reflected in this midrash. Not only is there's a view, the view has some basis in the terms of comparing him to Eliyahu. And then the midrash goes on. Rabbi Tanchuma observed, he answered them well, right? Good job. So, but look at it, doesn't die. A matron asked Rabbi Yossi. Now, often when the Talmudic literature says matron, matrona, so same word. So that's a reference to a Roman, the wife of a Roman official. There were strata of Roman society. They had a lot of money, servants. The wives didn't have, the men are off fighting battles. The women sit around thinking about philosophy. And there's all kinds of discussions in the Talmud of these women asking rabbis questions about Judaism. And there are many who think that many.
Wait a minute, how can you talk to a woman?
I guess they were modern Orthodox back then. So there's some evidence that many of these women actually converted to Judaism. Okay, so a matron asked Rabbi Yossi, we do not find death stated of Chanoch. It's the same question that the heretics asked. He didn't die. Doesn't say he died. Said he to her, wait a second. If it said, and Chanoch walked with God and no more, I would agree with you. Right? If it would have just said he walked with God and kind of left it blank, maybe he was beamed up to heaven. But no, since, however, it says, and he was not, for God took him. So why does it say he was not, for God took him? That emphatic phrase. It means that he was no more in the world, having died, for God took him. Right? The pasuk itself is explaining in its emphatic language, he was not, and God took him, so that you wouldn't think, like you apparently think, Mrs. Smith, that somehow he never died. He's like Eliyahu, who got sort of beamed up to heaven. Okay, so now we're seeing something fascinating here, that Rashi is taking a very emphatic position, which is the position of the Midrash. But through the Midrash, we see that there was a strong alternative opinion, and it's not very highly regarded here in the Midrash, right? This opinion that he never died. It's rejected in the Midrash, and Rashi is quoting the opinion which rejects him. Now, Rashi, of course, once we see Rashi, let's see the other commentators. So let's see how they're all Ralbag, Rabbi Levi ben Gershom, who's sort of in the Maimonidean school of thought, and you'll see this right away. Ralbag. Behold, the text relates that Chanoch walked in the ways of the Lord after he bore Metushelach, in order to indicate that he had not walked in the ways of the Lord before that, but rather in the ways of those of his generation. You notice how it says he walked in the ways of the Lord twice in describing the career of Chanoch. And the first time that it says, we'll just skip up to that passage so you see it again, that it makes the statement that this phase in his life was after he had begotten Metushelach. It could have just said it in verse 24, and Chanoch walked with God, as sort of a summary of who he was. But apparently this religious awakening that he had was subsequent to having a baby. I know a lot of people sober up after having babies, right? They kind of start taking life more seriously. Maybe that's what happened to him. Okay, so that's the Ralbag points that out. It's fascinating. Before that, he had the same religious beliefs as everybody else in his generation. They're all pagans. And behold, Ralbag goes on, when he contemplated the nature of existence and attained some of the truth of God, which had not been attained by those of his generation, he then served God for 300 years. And then God took him. That is, his soul was placed in Gan Eden, as in the verse, with your counsel you led me, and afterwards you took me for glory. Now, this is fascinating. This is not like Rashi at all, not like the Midrash that Rashi's based on. Let's just contemplate what he's saying here. What happened after Metushelach was born, he came to recognize some of the truth of God.
He did tshuva.
He did tshuva. Now, it's interesting. What led him to that tshuva, according to the Ralbag? What's it say? What inspired him besides the birth? So it says he contemplated the nature of existence. What is that? A little hard to know, but what does that sound like if you had to guess?
He came to an understanding about Hashem on a higher level. I mean,
Yeah, through what? He had prophecy? What happened?
some type of meditative experience. I mean,
Yes, I don't think so. So
He had a kid.
yeah, so that yeah, I think that is important, and that might be actually
Through science. It sounds like through science.
exactly. I would say this is very much Rambam. See, Rambam did not distinguish between science and philosophy. Physics and metaphysics are right. In the Rambam, it's all one. We understand how the world works through. I think somebody's microphone is on and making a lot of beeping sounds there. Okay.
Avi, you got to unmute.
Yeah. If you're whatever you're doing, making a lot of
Well,
noise.
it does say he contemplated, so that's a Rambam word. I mean,
Yeah,
he's
and
thinking.
Hitbonen is the Hebrew word there, and the way it says beteva hanimtzaot, that's the Hebrew there. You have the nature of existence. So, what other personality does the Rambam describe exactly in this manner? Avraham. So Chanoch is a kind of proto Avraham in the eyes of Ralbag through philosophy, right? Through science. Now, what about this idea of God taking him? So Rashi, based upon the Midrash, is very emphatic, right? God killed him to do him a favor. Do you see any hint of that in the Ralbag? And if not, how does the Ralbag understand what happened to him? As a matter of fact, let's read the next paragraph. It'll be helpful. Behold, for this same reason, he's not mentioned as having died, while the other people mentioned with him are noted as having died. All the other generations says they died, to indicate the difference between him and them. For he perfected his soul and achieved his perfection, while all the others died without achieving this. So what's he saying here? What does it mean God took him? What's that all about, according to Ralbag?
I mean, he's taking up to Shemayim. It certainly sounds supernatural, a metaphysical experience of the soul.
Yeah, it's not clear to me whether the Ralbag is negating altogether that he died. It could very well be that he's saying he actually didn't die, but in some kind of philosophical process of perfection, that he reached a state where death was not relevant anymore. He had reached a kind of state of enlightenment, and that's what it means he's put in Gan Eden, right? And interesting enough, you notice how all these different approaches have verses to back it up, right? The Midrash said that, in Yechezkel, it says that God is going to take Yechezkel's wife, right? It means to kill her. And then the heretics said that with Eliyahu, God took him, meaning beamed him up to some heavenly spheres. And we have a verse in Tehillim which is being understood here as you took me for glory, which is understood as a reference to you beam me up into some state of a rapture of enlightenment that one achieves through philosophical perfection and called the Garden of Eden.
So I've asked this before, when the Ralbag does that, is it an asmachta because he has his own perspective, or through these verses, he came to have a perspective?
I'm sure it's the first way, right? The Ralbag is a philosopher, and that's how he understands this passage. And then he finds a good pasuk to support his theory. Okay, so this is amazing. So Chanoch, now we have a range of opinion in terms of the kind of accepted views here. We have Rashi, based on the Midrash, that he's a loser, basically, who has his moments of greatness and God is in favor by knocking him off. We have the Ralbag, who says Chanoch was actually a great philosopher who achieved perhaps the greatest perfection that one could have achieved in his time, philosophical perfection. And perhaps he didn't even die as real. That he's kind of just in a state of enlightenment which transcends the body, and that's called the Garden of Eden. Wow. Okay, now put on your seatbelts. And there was an opinion I didn't quote right now. It's the rejected opinion, right? The rejected opinion that Chanoch didn't die. He's like Eliyahu. He like got, I don't know what he is, but immortal. Okay, so let's take a look now at the Targum Yonatan. So Targum Yonatan, Aramaic translation of the Torah, often having a less literal approach than Unclus. Let's take a look at this. Targum Yonatan. And Chanoch served in the truth before the Lord. And behold, he was not with the sojourners of the earth, for he was withdrawn. And he ascended to the firmament by the word before the Lord. And his name was called Metatron, the great scribe. Well, I'll be a monkey's uncle. The world has completely changed now. So according to Targum Yonatan, Chanoch, he walked before the Lord, means that he served God in truth. And when it says, and he wasn't, it means he wasn't a mortal. Why? Because he was beamed up into heaven, right, by the word of God. And he became Metatron, the great scribe. Wow. Now, this is starting to sound a lot more like the views in the Midrash, which were vociferously rejected by the Midrash and were rejected by Rashi. But here it is in Targum Yonatan. Targum Yonatan is printed in a good edition of Mikro Kedolot. Little hard to say that this is heresy.
Well, that's why I'd asked you earlier if the Sefer Enoch was prior to all this or after all this.
Okay, so your timing is always impeccable, Bruce. So what I want to do now is explore this radical new level now that Chanoch is Metatron. So I'd like to know who Metatron is. So let's take a look at a work which we know is medieval. So it's called Sefer Yashar, and it's that kind of a midrashic view of a survey of biblical history. And it has all kinds of groovy stuff in it. It's very entertaining. Let's take a look at how this book, which is a well-accepted book, Sefer Yashar, it's not, the Torah itself mentions Sefer Yashar, it's not this book. This is like I said, early medieval book that rabbinic establishment embraced. Right nowadays, you go Sefer Yashar, that's cool. You're not going to be thrown out of your synagogue. Let's read. It's a little long, but it'll be worth it. And after many days and years, while engaged in services and prayers to the Lord in his hidden chamber, that's Chanoch, an angel of the Lord called upon him from heaven, and he said, "Here I am." And he said to him, "Arise and leave thy house and thy hiding place, and go among all men to teach them the ways of the Lord, and the good deeds they have to practice in following the ways of the Lord." So Chanoch is kind of a recluse. He's meditating on God. He's hiding out. But at a certain point, an angel says, you have to come out of retirement, come out of your cave, like Rishon Bar Yochai. Come out of your cave now and spread the good word. So what happened? Chanoch arose and he left his house and hiding place. Notice hiding place. He wasn't thrilled about this new job, wherein he was, according to the word of the Lord. And he went out among the people, instructing them in the ways of the Lord. And he gathered together all the people of that time and made known to them the instruction of the Lord. And he ordered men to go about and publish in a loud voice in all the dwelling places of the sons of man as follows. I just want to pause here for a second. So far in this narrative, is Chanoch a human being?
Yeah.
He's human. Is he
Mhm.
alive?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, in the story, he's alive. It's just he's been given this assignment. Okay. But he was in hiding, and God now tells him through this angel he's supposed to go out and preach the gospel. Now, here's the message. Who is the man that is desirous to understand the ways of the Lord and the actions which are good and just? Let him come to Chanoch, and all the people willing to learn those things gathered around Chanoch. And Chanoch ruled over the sons of man according to the words of God. And they came and bowed down to him to the ground. And all of them obeyed unanimously to his word. Wow. So what's Chanoch now, seemingly?
Like a king of some type, a ruler.
He's like a king. Is he human?
Yeah. Mhm.
He's human, but he's a king. Also, it's interesting. We just discussed a few minutes ago, how does he compare with the other people's generation? According to this, they all obeyed unanimously to his words. So he kind of ushered in a kind of messianic almost state of being there, at least temporarily, as people followed his teachings and leadership as king. And the Spirit of God rested upon Chanoch, and he taught all his men the wisdom of God and his ways. And they served the Lord through all the days of Chanoch. And the people always came to hear his wisdom. And the kings of all the sons of man served unto the Lord through all the days of Chanoch. They also came to hear his wisdom. All the kings of the nations, the highest and the lowest, their princes and judges, all came unto Chanoch when they heard of his wisdom, and they bowed down before him with their countenance to the ground. And they greatly begged of him to be their ruler until he consented. And they gathered together about 130 kings and princes, and they made Chanoch their king, and were all subject to his hands and to his words. Interesting. So he's a king. Not only is he a king, but interesting formulation. It doesn't say it explicitly, but he's also a king of
Mankind.
King of Kings.
Yeah.
Right? King of Kings. You ever heard that expression used? Melech Malchei Amlachim? King of Kings. Interesting. Okay. And Chanoch taught them wisdom and knowledge and the ways of God. And he made peace between all of them. So the peace reigned through the whole earth in the days of Chanoch. And Chanoch ruled over the sons of man for 243 years. And he dispensed law and justice to all his people. And he directed them in the ways of God. And these are the generations of Chanoch. We'll skip that. And it was in the 56th year of Lamech's life that Adam died. Skip a little bit more. Okay. Adam died. Okay, now we'll go to the next paragraph. And it was in the year of Adam's death, which was the 243rd year of Chanoch's reign. He's a king. That Chanoch put in his mind once more to withdraw from the sons of man. Remember, he doesn't really like being in the limelight. He's a mystic. He likes being in the cave. So he decided he's going to separate himself from society into seclusion, as he did once before, in order to serve the Lord without distraction. It's hard to be a king. Yet he did not maintain his solitude all the time, but he would stay away for 3 days and show himself to the people for 1 day. So he was part-time king, every 3 days. And during the 3 days of his solitary confinement, he would pray to the Lord and sing praises to him. And on the 4th day, he would come forth to his subjects in order to teach them the ways of God. And whatsoever they would inquire after, he would explain it to them. So I'll just skip a little bit here. He then started to work even less, more part-time. He would teach for only 1 day out of 7. And then he gradually morphed into 1 day in a month. And then eventually 1 day in a year. And the kings and the princes and all the people gathered together with a great desire to see Chanoch's face once more and to listen to his voice, but they could not do it. For all the sons of man were greatly afraid of Chanoch, and they dared not come near to him on account of the divine dignity resting upon his countenance. Does that evoke anything, another biblical personality that
like Moshe?
Like Moshe, right? He's a teacher, maybe reluctant, but more than that, he has teaching to teach, but he's scary. The divine dignity resting upon his countenance, his face. Countenance means face, right? The rays of light coming out of Moshe's face. And all the kings and all the princes held counsel together and concluded to assemble all the sons of man, that they might come, one and all, to Chanoch their king, that they all could speak to him on the day he was to show himself again. Okay. We'll skip a little bit more. He teaches him, they want to hear his Torah. And then there's another change. And soon after, while all the kings, the princes, and the people were talking unto Chanoch, and he instructed them in the ways of the Lord, all at once an angel of the Lord called Chanoch from the heaven to come up, because it was resolved to make Chanoch ruler over the sons of God in the heavens, even as he ruled over the sons of man on earth. Wow, what's going on now? So he was just a lone mystic who was then drafted. He became the king and the king of kings on earth. Now he's getting an upgrade. In heaven, they want him to be the king there, the king over the sons of God. Who are the sons of God, apparently? That's a tough one. If you had to just take a stab, at least how it's commonly understood.
Some type of angelic being?
Yeah, angels. He's going to be the king of the angels. And when Chanoch heard these words, he called together all the sons of man, all the human beings that were his subjects till now. And he instructed them in knowledge and wisdom and in the fear of God. And finally, he spoke to them saying, I have been summoned to ascend into the heavens, and I know not the day that I have to go and leave you. And now, before I part from you, I want to teach you once more all the wisdom, knowledge, and morality you were to observe in future upon the earth. And then it describes how he teaches them once more. And we'll skip just a bit. And while they were seated around Chanoch, listening to his words of wisdom, they lifted up their eyes and beheld the figure of a large horse coming down from the heavens. And the horse walked upon the air to the earth. And the people were bewildered, and they informed Chanoch of what they saw. And he said to them, it is for me that this uber horse is descending. The time has come. Today I must go away from you, and you shall see me no more. At the same time, the horse came down and stood before Chanoch, and all the people of Chanoch saw it. And Chanoch ordered it to be announced with a loud voice for the last time. Who is the man that desires to understand the ways of the Lord his God? Let him then come today, because it's your last chance, to Chanoch, before it's taken away from us. Okay, image, horse, ascending to heaven on a horse.
Eliyahu.
Eliyahu. Image of Moshe, image of Eliyahu. By the way, I must admit my ignorance. I never read the Quran. Isn't there something about a horse going to heaven on a horse?
Yes, Muhammad has a horse story.
Yeah, and I think they go to heaven.
This sounds like an abduction story.
Yeah, so in any case, isn't that interesting that this kind of motif of going to heaven on a horse kind of resurfaces? Okay. So he teaches them another time, and we're just going to skip a little bit here. He tells them to go back, and they don't all go back. Actually, some of them who don't go back get destroyed. They can't approach the spiritual rarefied atmosphere where he's going. And then it concludes, and all the days of Chanoch that he lived upon the earth were 365 years. By the way, nobody mentioned something about his lifespan. How long did he live?
Well, let's say 365.
365 years. Okay, now, this is mind-blowing, because though this is not a Talmudic work, medieval, but it was well accepted, and Chanoch now has been upgraded, because we'll just take a look at conceptually. Rashi's point of view, he's a man, and he's not even such a great guy, right? Even the Midrash called him someone who was on the list of evil people. According to the Ralbag, he's human, completely human. It's just he's a great philosopher. Okay. Now, all of a sudden, we got Targum Yonatan. Targum Yonatan says he's Metatron, except for what term have we not seen yet?
Angel.
So he's an angel in the Sefer Yashar, right? But we have not seen the word Metatron appear here. So now we're going to go to, Bruce, what you were asking about before.
I have to ask him, when is Targum Yonatan? When is that?
Yeah. So again, we don't 100% know, but we do think that it reflects strong Talmudic traditions in it. So it might come from like early Gaonic times, like 9th century, something like that, perhaps before. But it's considered to be a reliable reflection of Talmudic traditions coming from the time of the Second Temple. Now, we're going to take a look at Sefer Yashar. We said it's medieval. What you think? The author just he smoked too much marijuana and he just wrote this crazy stuff. Right? He has traditions that he has access to. What are those traditions? Where they come from? So now we have to talk about this whole body of literature that is not part of the Tanakh, also not easy to date. Okay, now this is the general area that we can.
Is there like Christian overtones with this transformation of man, angel or not human, or does it smack of anything Christian, or is it just, that's my imagination here?
It's not your imagination. Let's think about it. Here's someone who dies prematurely. He doesn't really die. He's beamed up to heaven. He is the fact he became king on earth. What is Mashiach? Mashiach is a king. And not only that, but he's not immortal. He's an angel. And he becomes the King of Kings in the celestial realm. And he's not just an angel, he's the angels itself appointed him a king.
Just to flip that idea, if this is pre-Christian, maybe the Christians got this idea from us.
Okay, so that raises a huge issue that the scholars, academic scholars, crucify each other over these issues, believe it or not. Like, to what extent these things are derivative, coexistent, etc. And we'll have a chance to talk more about that as we see some of these sources. We have to get more data here. So let's just briefly mention this whole area of literature that could be generally called the Apocrypha. Now, generally speaking, when we say Apocrypha, we're referring to quite early texts, which are sometimes called intertestamental. What does that mean in the academic circles? So it's works that appear between the Torah, Tanakh, and the so-called New Testament, the Christian Bible. So we have a whole bunch of literature from that time period. So, and it was never accepted into the canon of Tanakh, and it's not considered to be sort of sacred literature. But for instance, one of the books, the book of Ben Sira, the rabbis of the Talmud quoted extensively, almost as if it was sacred literature, but it wasn't. Much of the Apocrypha was adopted by the Christian denominations. Each denomination adopted different books of the Apocrypha. Now, this particular work that we're going to look at seems to be actually later than this intertestamental period. To put it in our language, it's from the time of the second Beit HaMikdash. This literature is coming from the time of the second Beit HaMikdash. Now, if you've ever read anything about the Dead Sea Scrolls, it's the same type of, much of it is in the same style, what is often called apocalyptic, end of days. There's forces of good, forces of evil. Everything is very, 180 degrees difference. right? The forces of light, the forces of darkness, cosmic battle, etc. Some people get beamed up, everybody else is destroyed. Forces of evil, demonic forces, etc.
Does the Gemara
So-
try to ban this type of literature from our bookshelf?
Well, if we did, we didn't do a very good job, as you'll see in a second. So now the more kind of mystical type of literature, especially apocalyptic, like say end of days, Gog and Magog type of themes, which is according to Tanakh, right? You don't have to go to Apocrypha for that kind of thing. So that literature is often called Heichalot literature, which comes a little bit later, but it's written in the same style, this sort of apocalyptic and visions of what heaven looks like, what all the angels and God on a throne, etc. So this work we're going to take a look at, Sefer Chanoch. Now, Sefer Chanoch, which is not part of Tanakh, it's not part of the Mishnah, it's not part of the Gemara. So this is part of that body of apocalyptic literature or Heichalot literature, this sort of celestial visions of what goes on there. But if you look in a collection of Sefer Chanoch, it's called by different names, the Book of Enoch and other names. It's, according to almost all scholars, there's a bunch of chapters, they're not really one book. There are a bunch of different books that were kind of all put together. And they deal with different themes and different interests altogether. But one of them, which is the third book of Enoch, which is sometimes called among us, Sefer Chanoch Rabbi Yishmael Kohen Gadol, the book of Chanoch that was written by Rabbi Yishmael Kohen Gadol. We don't know exactly who Rabbi Yishmael Kohen Gadol is, by the way, though there are Rabbi Yishmaels who are Kohanim that are mentioned in the Gemara, but this is, scholars think it's pseudo epigrapha, meaning Rabbi Yishmael didn't write it. Whoever wrote it attributed to Rabbi Yishmael. If you want to believe Rabbi Yishmael wrote it, it's a free country. Okay, now I think there's one more thing I wanted to tell you about this.
Well, that was very common to attribute a book to a well-known person to increase your sales. That was
Certainly,
very common practice.
that's certainly true. So let's take a look now who Metatron is. Remember, Metatron is Chanoch. Chanoch, when he became king of the angels, he got a different name, Metatron. This is just a short selection. It's long, but I just want to see the salient passage. Rabbi Yishmael said, I said to Metatron, why are you called? And I want you, as we read this, notice if you see anything a little shocking about what's happened to Chanoch, or the evil guy of Rashi. Rabbi Yishmael said, I said to Metatron, why are you called by the name of your creator with 70 names? You are greater than all the princes, more exalted than all the angels, more beloved than all the ministers, more honored than all the hosts, and elevated over potentates in sovereignty, greatness, and glory. Why then do they call you youth in the heavenly heights? He answered, because I am Chanoch, the son of Yered. When the generation of the flood sinned and turned to evil deeds and said to God, go away, the holy and blessed be took me from their midst to be a witness against them in the heavenly heights, to all who should come into the world. So he's a scribe. He's going to write down all the evil deeds. So if anybody asks, why did you destroy the world? So it's all recorded here in the transcript, all these people and their criminal records, and why it was justifiable to destroy them. Because I'm young in their company and a mere youth among them in days and months and years, therefore they call me youth. It's all interesting to note, he died young. So he's young, but he has a very important job. Rabbi Yishmael said, the angel Metatron, prince of the divine presence, the glory of highest heaven said to me, now this is pretty amazing. The prince of the divine presence, the glory of highest heaven, that's Chanoch. Remember him of Rashi infamy? said to me, this is now Metatron, Chanoch speaking, when the Holy and Blessed be He took me to serve the throne of glory, the wheels of the chariot and all the needs of the Shekhinah, at once my flesh turned to flame, my sinews to blazing fire, my bones to juniper coals, my eyelashes to lightning flashes, my eyeballs to fiery torches, the hairs of my head to hot flames, all my limbs to wings of burning fire, and the substance of my body to blazing fire. This would be a good movie. On my right, those who cleave flames of fire. On my left, burning brands. Round about me swept wind, tempest, and storm, and the roar of earthquake upon earthquake was before me and behind me. Comments? What's happening here?
Well, a transformation.
Yeah, he ain't no just angel. I don't know what to say. He is what it says here. Rabbi Yishmael said, Metatron, the prince of the present, said to me, by reason of the love with which the Holy and Blessed be He loved me more than all the children of heaven. Remember what the children of heaven? They're angels. But God loved me special. He made me a garment of glory on which were fixed all kinds of lights, and He clad me in it. And He made me a robe of honor on which were fixed all kinds of beauty, splendor, brilliance, and majesty. And He made me a royal crown in which were fixed 49 costly stones, like unto the light of the globe of the sun. And for its splendor went forth in the four quarters of Arba Rakia, and in through the Arba Rakia, and in through the seven heavens and the lesser quarters, 4 quarters of the world. And He put it into my head, or on my head, His crown. And He called me Hashem Katan. I kid you not. Yud He Vav He Katan. In the presence of all His heavenly household, as it is written, for my name, God says, is in Him. Well, I'll be a monkey's uncle. Comments. Whatever happened to the loser Chanoch here?
Is this in the realm of Midrash or
Well, just
Kabbalah,
first of all,
which
let's
don't
just,
know the
I just
difference?
want to articulate what just happened before we comment.
Who is writing this? He's writing this about himself?
So, Rabbi, in the story, Rabbi Yishmael Kohen Gadol is reporting what
All this sort of
Metatron
stuff being gone.
Chanoch told him. That's the narrative, right? So Metatron Chanoch is saying to this Rabbi Yishmael Kohen Gadol, I got some interesting news about me. I was really promoted. I'm actually Yud He Vav He Katan now.
I mean, was this Midrashic literature or what we would call Kabbalistic, which might be much older? I don't know. I mean, like, what is Kabbalistic literature? Would this be in those books? Which we
This
don't
is
know
extremely popular in Kabbalistic literature, and you will see that the Zohar adopts these types of themes in discussing Metatron and Chanoch. So, but I just want to make a point that nobody has said yet. By calling him Hashem Katan and invoking this pasuk, which comes from Shemot, for my name is in him, which is referring to an angel. We'll have to discuss that as we go on. What's that saying about what happened to Chanoch, who's now Metatron, who's now, I need someone to say it.
He's above an angel, or whatever the levels of angels are. He's up there. He's no longer human.
He's certainly not human, and he's not even angelic. I mean, what does it mean to say Hashem Katan? He's I think there's a word, demigod. I mean, I'm not joking, right? He's a kind of God.
We don't believe in that stuff.
That's what you think. Okay, so we're gonna have to pause now in this. Now, I hope you'll be able to sleep for a week. Because what I want to do as we move forward next week, I want to take a look at 2 important stories in the Talmud that talk about Metatron and see what happens to Metatron and see ultimately if we can draw some very sweeping conclusions about the evolution regression, not sure, of monotheism. It's really important notions. The relationship between Jewish notions and other notions. What's authentically Jewish, what's not authentically Jewish. Coming up to the year 2021. And I'm going to show you something by the time we're done. It may change your life forever, and I'm not sure for the better.
Are you going to bring that from the Book of Enoch itself?
I'm sorry?
Are you going to bring sources from the Book of Enoch? It's the actual book that is
Yes.
sort of attributed
Yeah.
to him?
You'll see. You'll get everything. Your belly will be full. Okay, everybody. We'll see you next week.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
My
A
pleasure. Thank you.
cliffhanger. It's a cliffhanger.
It is.
Thank
Okay,
you.
sure.
Bye-bye.